So let's get started here today. So we're here kind of in a collaboration with New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and we're really excited today to have this workshop. We got started talking to them a little while back about some of their priorities, and we came to this conclusion together that this workshop might be a really good idea. Kind of focus it on New Jersey communities, focus it on New Jersey priorities, both climate resilience, water quality, and long-term planning goals, and how we can start to think about how all those things will mesh. So we've titled the workshop today, A Stepping Stone to One Water Planning for Municipalities in New Jersey. And I'm gonna get into a little bit about what One Water Planning is, what integrated planning is for those who may not necessarily know exactly how we define that term. And then we're gonna have a case study later in the presentation. Let me skip to the agenda. We're going to hear from Arundel County, Eric Michelson, the Deputy Director of Public Works, and we're going to hear how they've used integrated planning to address a lot of their clean water goals. We're also going to hear from DEP program administrators on how they see integrated planning potentially playing into DEP priorities and local government priorities in New Jersey in the future. And then we're going to break out into 5 breakout sessions. I've categorized the local government folks in the workshop based off of geography. So what watershed or watersheds your community is in. And we have wonderful folks from EFC, Environmental Finance Center at University of North Carolina, at the University of Maryland, and then the Water Center at the University of Pennsylvania, and then some folks from EPA facilitating those breakout groups. And then we're going to come back together and hear some of the highlights from the breakout groups. And we're going to walk out of the workshop today. Everyone's going to have an idea of what's your next step. You know, who's the next person you need to talk to? What's the next step you need to take in order to potentially pursue an integrated plan or pursue water quality and planning from the framework or from the mindset of One Water? So what's the next thing you need to do? So I just want to introduce Robin DeYoung, the lead of the Integrated Planning and Green Infrastructure Program at the US EPA. And she's going to give a brief introduction, and then I'm going to get a little bit more background on One Water and integrated planning.
Thank you, Evan, and hi everyone for being here today. I'm Robin DeYoung. I've been at EPA since 2010, but prior to that, I worked at the state government, and I've been working with local governments and to help them protect public health, protect the environment in many different arenas for air and clean water. And I'm really excited that you guys are all here. It's great to talk to people from New Jersey. I'm a native Jersey girl, so it's great to be here today. And you know what we recognize is that many municipalities are dealing with aging infrastructure and limited resources. And the water quality issues, you know, they're very complex. And so we wanted to make sure that you were aware of some of the tools and the planning and the mindset that can help with these new ideas, approaches to invest in your infrastructure improvements so that you can meet some of the clean water goals that you have, and you can figure out how to prioritize your infrastructure investments so that you can get that greatest bang for your buck, so to speak. And also involving some of the community benefits. And so, you know, there are many municipalities who have done this already. There aren't any in New Jersey as of yet, but we're hoping that a few of you today will get excited about this and want to work with us because there are a lot of benefits to doing this type of integrated stormwater and wastewater planning. It can, Evan's going to talk to you about how that also fits into many other planning approaches like One Water, resiliency planning, and some of the things that you'll hear from New Jersey DEP today. But you can get your faster water quality improvements and health protections when you're doing integrated planning. And there are many municipalities who have already gained those benefits. And you can also have efficiency in costs and figure out how you can make this the most affordable infrastructure investments possible. The bringing in the community is a key part of integrated planning. We have this six-step process that Evan will talk about. And so having that community involvement, stakeholder engagement is also a plus. Even if you are a little hesitant to bring in the community, it does help in the long run for buy-in. And then being innovative is something that we really want you guys to think about. Green infrastructure is a big part of this, and different ways that you can sequence your investments so that you can be innovative over time. So really excited to be here. Thank you very much. And I wanted to let you all know that we are going to be offering technical assistance from EPA. The EFC also is offering technical assistance through September. So if you're thinking about getting started and you need help with stakeholder engagement, scoping out your plan, reviewing potential funding sources, measuring performance of the things that you're thinking about, then think about, I'll put my email in the chat so that you can always contact me afterwards. So I'll turn it back over to Evan. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. So I want to get started by defining One Water, because it's a relatively new term. Last 10 or 15 years, it's been used a little bit more commonly recently. So One Water is the idea that all water has value, and that all water, so wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, surface water, groundwater, all water should be managed in a sustainable, inclusive, and integrated way. And I really like the fact that the U.S. Water Alliance uses integrated in their definition, because we're here talking about integrated planning, and that allows us to distinguish a little bit between the definition of integrated water resources management and then integrated planning as EPA defines it for the purpose of regulatory compliance. The Water Research Foundation defines One Water as an integrated planning and implementation approach to managing finite water resources for long-term resilience and reliability, meeting both community and ecosystem goals. So I highlighted both community and ecosystem goals because I think that's what the linchpin of One Water planning is it's really a One Water approach allows us to achieve benefits that we might not otherwise achieve through traditional approaches. So we're able to achieve what we call the triple bottom line benefits. So we're achieving social benefits, environmental benefits, and economic benefits. And when we achieve all of those, we're really achieving sustainable water resource management. So I want to get in real quickly to some of the examples of what social, economic, and environmental benefits of One Water planning are. So what are social benefits of One Water planning? So we're able to protect public health. We're able to incorporate stakeholders' desires into water resource planning. So we're able to listen to the community, listen to our community groups, listen to our businesses, listen to anyone who has a say and has their heart in your community. You're able to listen to what is their concerns, what are their priorities. And when you're able to address community priorities within your One Water planning, you've got more buy-in from your community, and people are more willing to pay the rates that are necessary to achieve these goals. They're more willing to participate in the process. You're able to remediate environmental justice burdens. So we're able to potentially use One Water planning, use integrated planning in a way that can rectify past wrongs or rectify systematic injustices within the community that have to do with environmental burdens. And then you're able to foster community resilience to climate change. And so we're going to hear from some folks at DEP about some climate resilience planning priorities that the state has and that local governments are having to comply with in New Jersey in the future. And so recognizing that One Water and integrated planning is a way to address these climate concerns while addressing your water resource management concerns. What are some of the environmental benefits of One Water? So these are a little bit more obvious because we're protecting surface water quality, we're managing our water supplies, we're managing our watersheds, we're preserving our forests and our riparian buffers. We're protecting groundwater quality, potentially groundwater for drinking or for agricultural irrigation. And then we're working synergistically with agriculture and wastewater treatment. So in the past, potentially, if you have any sort of nutrient demands, such as a TMDL or the Chesapeake nutrient rule, for example, that is something that potentially was put on the shoulders of your stormwater program, and they had to deal with that by themselves. But with an integrated planning approach, with a One Water approach, it's all of your water resource management working together towards the same goal. Economic benefits of One Water. So businesses love communities that have safe, reliable water resource management. So whether that's safe drinking water, whether it's reliable and high enough capacity for your wastewater in order to deal with the business's demands, and then businesses are increasingly becoming more interactive with your watershed. So I know there's a lot of folks that are dealing with microbreweries and with breweries that are working on what they call their beer sheds, their watersheds, where they get clean drinking water for brewing beer, and that's a really cool collaboration that I've seen, where you've got businesses that are really getting into the watershed management and really taking ownership, and they recognize that they're just as much a member of the community as their customers are and their employees. We're creating an environment in which business has bought into water efficiency and water stewardship. So I kind of mentioned on the water stewardship side, the beer example. I'm sure there are other examples that don't have to do with beer. And then there's the water efficiency collaboration. So a lot of local governments have been collaborating with businesses in order to achieve higher standards for water efficiency, such that the town's capacity to maintain drinking water supply is heightened. You're not coming up on your capacity challenges as quickly. And when you're incorporating your business and stakeholder desires into your water resource management, that just increases your buy-in. So I was talking a little bit about stakeholder engagement on the customer side, on the resident side, and now on the business side. If you get buy-in from both your community members and your businesses, then you've got total buy-in. So I just talked about One Water, and I know I mentioned integrated planning in that description a little bit, but I want to get into what integrated planning is for the purposes of EPA's definition of integrated planning within their integrated planning framework. So we're really talking, focusing on the bottom line is Clean Water Act obligations. So we're talking about wastewater treatment permits. We're talking about MS4 stormwater permits. We're talking about TMDLs, and if anyone has a combined sewer overflow challenge or a sanitary sewer overflow challenge, these are the challenges that we're talking about when we mention Clean Water Act obligations. So it's a voluntary approach, and so no one's forcing anybody to undertake integrated planning, but communities across the country have started to undertake integrated planning, recognizing the benefits of it. So it's a voluntary approach for municipalities, and that includes county governments, to meet Clean Water Act obligations by sequencing wastewater and stormwater projects that best prioritize capital investments and achieve human health and water quality objectives. Integrated planning also considers environmental and community priorities, climate resilience priorities, and then it allows you to reprioritize the method in which you're achieving Clean Water Act compliance in a more flexible manner that may include green infrastructure, and may include stormwater investments where you otherwise may have had to invest in wastewater investments, or vice versa. And as long as you're achieving the same or better water quality outcomes, you've got these flexibilities, and you can potentially get the support from your state permitting authority and from your EPA region. So integrated planning is a process, and EPA's graphic for integrated planning shows a cyclical process where you're first identifying what your clean water goals are and what your other community goals are. And that's really what we're going to be focusing on in the breakout room today, where we're going to be talking a lot about what are your community goals, what are your challenges, who do you need to talk to, are there other entities that you need to be collaborating with? And so I don't want to give it away too much, but we're going to be talking a lot about element one and element 3 in the breakout room today. Element 2, the next step, is characterizing what parts of your system are contributing to your Clean Water Act challenges, what parts are doing a really nice job. So if anyone's heard of asset management, capital improvement planning, that's what element 2 really focuses on. Element 3 is engaging with your stakeholders, and we really like to encourage local governments to identify existing stakeholder groups and engage with those groups. So you don't necessarily have to put together an organic group of stakeholders. You can leverage the existing stakeholder groups that other organizations have already built within your local government, within your community, and engage them throughout the entire process. You don't have to wait to when you're done characterizing your system to engage your stakeholders. You can be engaged in them throughout the entire process. And we've heard from other local governments that have successfully completed integrated plans that that's a really good approach, is to be engaging your stakeholders throughout the entire process. Element 4 is identifying the projects that you're going to be implementing and the sequence of those projects to comply with your Clean Water Act obligations and to meet your community goals. You want to set goals for those projects and for that planning that is measurable. And so in element 5, you can measure your performance after you've started to implement some of these projects and some of these best management practices. And once you are able to measure that success, you can go on to element 6. And if you're not achieving what you thought you would achieve, you can go back and go back to element 4, go back to element 3 and do more stakeholder engagement and try to improve the process. So we call that adaptive management, where we're looking at how well are we achieving our goals? And then if we're not doing a good job of achieving our goals, are there other things that we can do differently in order to better achieve those goals? So that's a really long description of a somewhat complicated process, right, in a very short amount of time. So we do have other workshops that we've done on a more national level that describes integrated planning in a little bit more in-depth way. EPA has an excellent website that has a handbook for integrated planning. They have fact sheets on getting started, on funding for integrated planning. I'll be posting those things in the chat. So if this is the first time you're hearing about integrated planning and it's really piquing your interest, then there's a lot more resources that you could dig in on. So with that, I want to quickly, I kind of already touched on how One Water is connected to integrated planning. Integrated planning has One Water built throughout it. So there's components of One Water that aren't necessarily integrated planning, but there are very few components of integrated planning that aren't One Water. So we're really looking at how integrated planning might allow you to do things that you might not otherwise have been able to do. And those things will achieve One Water goals in the triple bottom line: economy, public, and profit. So it's really a great opportunity for communities that they haven't had, in the past 15 years since EPA released their memo about a decade ago. Robin mentioned that we are providing technical assistance for integrated planning for folks that are just getting started, for folks that have questions, maybe identifying funding sources, talking through the process, what they need to do next to get started. EFC is providing that technical assistance through September 30th. She mentioned EPA is providing it post September 30th. So please come to us, come talk to us. We can facilitate conversations, make sure you're talking to the right people, make sure you're on the right approach. And it's just a really excellent free opportunity for you to really talk through the process with us. So please contact me. Email is emkirk@sog.unc.edu. And I will be posting this again in the chat as well. So you'll see a lot of things coming in through the chat, so stay tuned. With that, I want to introduce Katie Angaroni, the Associate Commissioner for Science and Policy at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Katie's going to talk a little bit about the conversations that we've been having with DEP alongside EPA and alongside the Water Center at UPenn. She's going to set the groundwork for us on how DEP is approaching integrated planning and how we see it fitting in New Jersey in the future.
Okay, I was hoping that I could share my screen. Is that possible?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to make you co-host.
Okay, not essential, but.
Okay, I've made you a co-host and I'm going to stop my share.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen.
That's good.
Great. All right, welcome. I'm going to be very short because I know time is short. But I have to say that I am, again, I'm Katie Angarone. I'm the Associate Commissioner for Science and Policy here at DEP. And my role at DEP really is to connect dots. And I'm excited to be here because that's really what this is about. I connect dots across our agency in a myriad of ways, but I focus on health, water, and climate. So this feels particularly relevant to all that I do. It checks a lot of boxes. And DEP in general is really glad to be a part of this today and to learn more about the integrated approach from EPA. You know, our regulatory structure is often constraining. It is, of course, necessary, and it's necessarily black and white. I know that. I've been a regulator for 25 years, so I get it. But sometimes the best solution really is an innovative one that exists outside of our usual construct. And cooperation between different permittees can bring us more efficiently, I think, to the results than sometimes just strict adherence to the rules is. And I'm not talking about a leniency or an erosion of quality. I don't think anyone is talking about that, but we are certainly talking about a flexibility that gets us where we're going faster and more efficiently by sort of pulling on some different levers. So we talk about One Water a lot here at the department, and my job is to pull together a watershed approach and also to pull together everyone on climate. So we've brought together some of our key folks here today to talk to you a little bit and give you a backdrop about regarding where we are and exactly what initiatives we're doing that we see could come together. So today we'll learn about this innovative approach, but first we're going to hear about climate change and all that we're doing to address it. And you'll hear from our Chief Resilience Officer, Nick Angarone, regarding municipal vulnerabilities in particular. Then you'll hear from Jen Feltis-Cortez, who will give us an overview of our NJPTES permitting and wastewater system asset management and how that fits in. And finally, we'll hear about municipal stormwater management and the MS4 permitting program from Gabe Mahan. And all of those things link together, to make our responsibility, I think, clear. I think we all take our responsibility to manage New Jersey's water seriously. And the needs really, we understand, seem to be getting more and more complex as our technology evolves and as we heard before, as our infrastructure ages. And we understand that. These are challenging times. And as such, I think it requires us to be flexible and innovative while maintaining those protections and hopefully shortening the distance to the goal. So with that, I will hand it to the Chief Resilience Officer, Nick Angarone.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to touch very briefly on the municipal vulnerability assessments, why they're important, and how DEP can provide some assistance and resources in there. This is all, of course, predicated on the understanding that we are currently experiencing impacts from climate change, which, if you've been outside today, you certainly can feel. We know and understand that we are going to see future additional worsening impacts from climate change, right? Whether that's additional extreme heat, increased precipitation, severity of weather events, worsening sea level rise, and those impacts will have, or those climate impacts will affect our neighbors, our friends, right, our citizens. They are going to affect our water supply and our water quality. They are going to impact the health and safety of the residents of the state. They are going to impact our infrastructure. We are going to see increased flooding and increased drought. And so while we know that all of this is happening and will happen statewide, the specific impacts to your communities, to our communities, will be unique and specific. And so that's why it's critical that every municipality understand and evaluate what those impacts are going to be through some level of vulnerability assessment. The federal government, the state government can set funding resources and regulations and can provide guidance, but the vast majority of decisions that are going to determine whether New Jersey and our local communities are resilient are going to happen at the local level. And so we all need to understand what those impacts are going to be. To provide assistance or direction toward that effort, in 2021, Governor Murphy and the legislature passed an amendment to the New Jersey's municipal land use law requiring municipalities to incorporate a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment into any newly adopted land use plan element of your master plan, right? And so this requirement aligns with the statewide climate change resilience strategy, but is also an important step in accelerating local understanding and action on those climate impacts. And so that vulnerability assessment requires not only that we look at kind of like our critical resources, right, which is kind of what we always think about when we start doing vulnerability assessments, but it also requires that we look at the broader impacts to our community, right, as well as the secondary impacts to our community and the future impacts to our communities. It interestingly requires a build-out analysis, so we understand what the impacts will be, not just to our existing development, but our future development, as well as the infrastructure and resources that would serve that future development. And so this is a critical first step for any local government to begin to understand their vulnerabilities and begin to take action. The department has developed some resources, not the least of which is a Resilient NJ local resilience planning toolkit. But we also have a little bit of funding to provide assistance to our local government. Some of you who are here today are receiving that grants to do this work. We should also understand that other parts of state government are also requiring this same vulnerability assessment and beyond, right? And so for some of you who are participating in the state plan endorsement process, right, this same requirement is part of that process, right? Office of Emergency Management is spearheading efforts to include climate change in its hazard mitigation planning guidance and is including those impacts into development of the county and local hazard mitigation plans. Every one of New Jersey's 22 of New Jersey's agencies and departments who serve with me on New Jersey's Interagency Council on Climate Resilience will be similarly performing some level of vulnerability assessment, but also determining how our policies, plans, regulations, and decision-making can all incorporate those climate impacts, right? And so I'll stop there and simply end on noting that, again, DEP does have some resources and technical assistance that we can provide. And to the extent that you're interested, we are certainly happy to assist in that manner.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? Thank you. Hi, I'm Jennifer and I work for the Director's Office in the Division of Water Quality. Our division is responsible for protecting New Jersey's groundwater and surface water quality by assuring the proper treatment and discharge of wastewater and its residuals from a variety of facilities and activities. The division issues New Jersey's pollutant discharge elimination system permits, commonly referred to as the GPDIS permits, pursuant to the Clean Water Act. These permits limit the amount of pollutants discharged into the waters of our state, and the program goals include restoring, enhancing, and maintaining the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters of the state. They're set up to protect public health and safety and potable water supplies, safeguard fish and aquatic life, and scenic and ecological values, and enhance the domestic, municipal, recreational, industrial, agricultural, and other uses of water, and most importantly, prevent, control, and abate water pollution. The division also implements the Treatment Works Approval Program, which regulates the construction and operation of industrial and domestic wastewater collection, conveyance, and treatment systems. In addition, we manage and implement the Water Bank Program that offers low-cost funding for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure projects. Together, these programs ensure that the state's water quality is protective of public and environmental health. So how does that relate to what we're talking about today? Municipalities or other wastewater entities may hold multiple NJPDES permits and have varied obligations under the Clean Water Act. For example, many municipalities may own and operate a sewer collection and conveyance system for which they have regulatory obligations to properly operate and maintain. In addition, these same municipalities are also responsible for the proper operation and maintenance of stormwater collection systems and the overall management of stormwater within its boundaries. And on top of that, some municipalities may also be responsible for the operation of a sewer treatment plant or even multiple treatment plants. Focusing on each Clean Water Act requirement individually may constrain a municipality from addressing its most serious water quality issues first. An integrated planning approach may provide a municipality an opportunity to develop a plan to meet multiple Clean Water Act requirements. And since we also administer the Water Bank program for funding clean water projects through low interest loans, there is also the potential for coordinating water quality permitting efforts to also seek low interest financing through the Water Bank. And I will now turn it over to Gabe to talk more about the stormwater.
Great, thanks, Jen. My name's Gabriel Mann, and like Katie said, I'm the manager of the MS4 program. And I really want to talk today briefly about our upcoming permit renewal, particularly the TMDL requirements, because I think that they can fit really well into an integrated planning approach. Just to briefly cover it, I'm going to go over what the current TMDL requirements are. So basically, municipalities right now have to annually review approved or adopted TMDL reports to identify stormwater related pollutants and for any segments of waters that are wholly or partially in their municipality. And then they have to take that information to assist in the prioritization of maintenance of their stormwater management facilities, as well as any stream scouring that's occurring at their outfalls. On top of that, they're supposed to identify and develop strategies to address specific sources of stormwater related pollutants that are in their discharges into those impaired waters or waters with TMDLs. Then they take that information and they're supposed to update their stormwater pollution prevention plan annually and incorporate any of those strategies into that plan. So that's today's requirements. But as we know, the MS4 program is an iterative program towards improving water quality. So as we're doing our permit renewal right now, our current permit expires at the end of the year, we are looking to revise and expand this TMDL requirement. So what we've done is to create something that we've shared as a pre-draft so far with our stakeholders, and we're calling it a watershed improvement plan. And this watershed improvement plan has really three main goals, and that's to improve water quality by reducing the contribution of pollutants for TMDL waters, and then the same thing for waters that are impaired and on the 303D list. And then the third goal is to reduce or eliminate stormwater related flooding in the municipality. And in order to do this, the permittee is going to have to create a three-part plan. And in all these parts, the permittee has to solicit input from stakeholders, including residents, business owners, and owners of private stormwater facilities, as well as bordering municipalities and other discharges in their sub watershed. And they have to do semi-annual public information sessions, which, that could be just including this topic on their regular town meetings, or they could have separate meetings to cover this. The first phase of the plan is something we're calling the watershed inventory report. And as its name indicates, it's really kind of an inventory of everything going on in the municipality. So it ranges from getting better mapping of their stormwater infrastructure, their outfalls, what drainage areas go to all the outfalls, the receiving water bodies, the classification of those water bodies, any stormwater interconnections they have from other MS4s and those drainage areas, as well as finding the TMDLs that are for all those waters and the impairments that are associated with those waters. Also mapping the overburdened communities that they have within their municipality and the impervious areas and location and ownership of privately owned stormwater facilities as well, particularly outfalls and basins. And then after that is completed, the second phase is what we're calling a watershed assessment report, and that's assessing the potential water quality improvements that they could get from projects in their sub-watersheds, estimating the % reduction that they can achieve for their TMDLs or impairments, getting a summary of the feedback from the public information sessions that they're doing, and then estimating the funding needs, as well as potential sources of funding, and coming up with an estimate of implementation schedule for these things. And once they create that report, then they do a public comment period on that report, and then use all that information from both the first two phases and the public information sessions to create a final watershed improvement plan. And that watershed improvement plan is just going to be a finalized version of everything that's going to summarize all the information from the watershed assessment report, and it's also going to summarize the comments they received on from the public and any changes they made to the final plan as a result, and how they're going to fit this plan into other regulatory requirements. So, and that could range from anything from all their other NJIPD's requirements, their combined sewer overflow long-term control plans if they have that, any requirements from the Pinelands or the Highlands or the Delaware River Basin Commission, just to name a few. And on top of that, this is going to have proposed implementation schedules for the water quality improvement projects that they develop as part of this plan. And then they'll basically have to start implementing this plan under the next iteration of the MS4 permit. So because the development of these 3 stages is going to pretty much take us through the 5-year life cycle of our permit. And we really feel that like this exact planning effort is something that fits really well into the whole integrated approach, because addressing a TMDL or an impairment in your water is not going to be very simple or straightforward. It's going to require input from everyone in the community and the surrounding municipalities, and an integrated planning approach really is going to be the best way to tackle that. That's about all the time I have, so I'll turn it back over to the next speaker.
Just want to say thank you to the DEP folks for coming, for supporting this workshop. I really recognize that it's going to make a big difference in the future once we're able to start implementing some of these efforts. So thank you so much for devoting your time and expressing your support for the effort. With that, I'll turn it over to Jen, and she's going to introduce our case study speaker. So go ahead, take it away, Jen.
Sure. Thanks, Evan. It's my pleasure to introduce someone that I have known for a very long time, Eric Michelson. He is the Deputy Director for Arundel County's Department of Public Works, heading up the Bureau of Watershed Protection and Restoration, which means that he is tasked with the recovery of the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries through restoration projects, scientific monitoring, and engagement of community stakeholders. He's been with the county since 2014, supporting clean water obligations like their MS4 permit and the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. And prior to joining the county, he was an environmental consultant for a number of years and the executive director of the South River Federation. So Eric's a triple threat. He understands water quality from the public, the private, and the nonprofit sectors. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric and let him tell you the story of our water in Anne Arundel County.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate the introduction. And I actually think coming on the heels of the discussion from the New Jersey DEP folks is really helpful, because so much of where Anne Arundel County finds itself now is really the result ultimately of both state and federal regulatory requirements. So this is a graph of a figure of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, just showing you where Anne Arundel County is. We're basically between Baltimore and Washington, D.C., at the heart of the Chesapeake Bay. And a lot of the things, most of the things, in fact, that I'm going to be talking about today really are, like I say, the product of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, total maximum daily load requirements that came in place a little over a decade ago, as well as enhanced MS4 permits on the stormwater side that go hand in glove, obviously, with those Chesapeake Bay TMDL goals. And those working in concert essentially helped get the county to where it was. So the conversations about the Chesapeake Bay TMDL really, though the TMDL was put in place in the 2010 timeframe, had started earlier, and as a result, in Anne Arundel County and I recognize also that this discussion is really heavily influenced by the structure of local jurisdictions. I'll just say that in Maryland, basically the county level is sort of the fundamental unit of government. And I know that there are township examples in Pennsylvania and New Jersey that are a little bit different, but that's allowed us to, I think fairly broadly and holistically about these issues. So in the years leading up to the actual execution of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL or implementation of the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, our Department of Public Works here in Anne Arundel County, which at that point included our Utilities Bureau, which is our water and sewer, as well as other bureaus, was focused on looking at across sectors. Essentially, how will Anne Arundel County achieve these eventual TMDL goals through reductions on the wastewater side, through stormwater reductions? We don't happen to have a lot of agriculture in Anne Arundel County. We have some, but not a tremendous amount. So most of our pollution load sources are associated with suburban development, and trying to figure out how do we work together to achieve cost-effective reductions across sectors to get to those goals. So that's really the driver of this Our Water program, and the QAA is a reference to Anne Arundel County and trying to give some branding here in terms of the initiative itself. But at this point, again, the program has evolved over the past decade or so, and it's an integrated program to reach our water quality goals, looking across these various source sectors. And again, it's really evolved, I'd say, over that time from not just a forward-looking way to achieve water quality goals, but also trying to build in water resiliency, generally speaking, into the county. And I'll speak to that too. I think probably like New Jersey, Maryland isn't an area where we have issues with water scarcity necessarily. We've got lots of precipitation. And even though most of our groundwater or our drinking water sources are actually groundwater sources for the most part in Anne Arundel County, but there's also longer term good reasons to try to be deliberate about creating a sustainable water source, even not being in the midst of the the arid West or something like that, where water is much more difficult to come by. So for us, again, just giving you sort of setting the stage in terms of Anne Arundel County. Though Baywide or statewide in Maryland, the agriculture is the biggest source of nitrogen pollution to the Chesapeake Bay, and nitrogen, phosphorus, and suspended solids are the three primary drivers for the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. You can see again in Anne Arundel County that our allocation is quite a bit different. So we have a significant chunk coming from the wastewater sector. We have 7 municipal wastewater treatment plants. We have a significant stormwater sector as a result of the suburban development that's occurred over the course of the past several decades. And we also have a significant contribution from septics. We've got about 40,000 septic systems countywide throughout the county. And so septics are a significant source of nitrogen, basically delivering sort of a steady stream of nitrogen in the groundwater as a result of those discharges. And as you can see from the map, we're largely a waterfront community, or a lot of the county is waterfront. And so it's a very short distance from those septic fields to the receiving waters. And so trying to figure out how do we address those issues has been a significant challenge as well. This clean water program that was put together or has been operated through our integrated efforts includes a program of septic to sewer connections, which is largely is almost completely voluntary at this point. Maryland does have some grant programs to incentivize that work on a small scale, but trying to do it on a broad scale is quite expensive, and it takes a lot of community engagement and conversations. Looking at the opportunity to upgrade small systems. So is there a way to take clusters of septic systems or existing small units and upgrade those to the limits of technology for nitrogen reductions, of course, stormwater program improvements, and that's really the program, in fact, that I'm charged with managing is our MS4 program and the conveyance and water quality elements associated with stormwater. And then also looking at wastewater treatment enhancements and groundwater resiliency, which, like I say, we'll talk about a little bit more in the past or in the future. So as I mentioned, Anne Arundel County has about 40,000 septic systems. Nearly 13,000 of those septic systems are within 1,000 feet of tidewater. And they are a significant source of nitrogen in the county. One of the challenges with septic systems is that generally people who have septic systems think they're working just fine. And oftentimes in terms of, the main goal that they're charged with achieving, which is bacterial reductions and that sort of thing, they are generally working okay. But this idea that even functioning properly, septic systems are a significant source of nitrogen is one where there's had to be a significant amount of public education and trying to build that understanding among the advocacy community so that they can get behind these initiatives. One of the other things that we're looking at is the idea that through our methods, and we've had significant upgrades of all of our municipal wastewater treatment plants. They're all upgraded to the limits of enhanced nutrient removal technology since 2018. That was required by the Maryland Bay Restoration Fund. There were state dollars that were matched to help upgrade those plants, and you'll see a little bit later in the presentation how incredible that performance has been. But one of the things we've begun to look at is like, well, we're operating really at the limits of performance now. What are the opportunities to get those discharges from those wastewater treatment plants potentially to zero, in terms of surface water discharge? And so we're beginning an exercise of looking at managed aquifer recharge, which is taking that, potentially taking that water from the effluent from the wastewater treatment plants, running it through an additional level of treatment, and then injecting it back into the groundwater aquifers to enhance the sustainability of that groundwater resource. In Hampton Roads, Virginia, south of where we are, there's been a big initiative, actually was driven by TMDL goals down there, to try to implement a managed aquifer recharge program. And that's been really, I think, held up as a national model. We're still working very closely with the state regulatory agencies. In our case, it's Maryland Department of the Environment, MDE, as there's some hesitation, some caution about proceeding along these lines, especially when we're not really showing that long-term necessarily we're going to run into groundwater sustainability issues. And so there's sort of a precautionary principle, I guess I would say, in place there, but we're pushing the envelope. In this case, not really for so much for TMDL compliance, because we've achieved a lot of those goals already, but for, like I say, groundwater sustainability and looking towards the future in terms of our wastewater treatment plants coming on with additional capacity and having additional loads created by new development. So one of the really neat aspects of our integrated efforts, and again, I'll say that having all of our water initiatives housed under the Department of Public Works locally here within the county has been tremendously helpful. But one of the real world examples of the utility of this is that we, in 2014, we received our newest MS4 permit. And in Maryland, those permits, or that generation of permits, were very, very aggressive in terms of restoration requirements, basically treating untreated impervious surface. I would say they're probably among the most aggressive in the country, in fact, as far as I'm aware. And so as a result of that, jurisdictions really had to increase their resources going to these efforts and really dramatically change their implementation schedules for the completion of this work. And so for us, we were given a permit that had required essentially, something on the order of probably 10 times as much restoration as we had done in any of our previous MS4 permits. We thankfully had at the beginning of that permit cycle put in place a stormwater utility fee that allowed us to derive the revenues to be able to do that work, but just the logistics of putting together a capital program to be able to execute that were daunting. And so, long story short, what happened was of the 10 or so, actually the 5 large MS4s in Maryland, 2 ended up being non-compliant with their permits in terms of that restoration component going into consent decree circumstances. We were able to use overperformance from the wastewater treatment plant sector, which had been upgraded as a result of those enhanced nutrient removal improvements that I discussed, and basically translate that into the metric of our MS4 permit, which is impervious acres treated, and sort of by a trade in time, essentially, on the stormwater sector to give us a couple of years to extend our compliance horizon and to replace that trade with actual in-the-ground restoration work. And I've just got a couple photographs of some of the efforts that we've done. This was a dry detention facility that was converted to a stormwater wetland. We did a lot of outfall stormwater treatments in Arundel County. We have coastal plain soils and Piedmont topography, so we've got lots of erosion issues at the outfall of conventional stormwater practices. One other element that I'd say that sort of speaks to this integrated planning effort is that we've been able to work closely with our utilities folks. Of course, as I'm sure most of the folks here are aware, there's oftentimes a lot of sewer infrastructure in these stream valleys as a result of trying to get the gravity flows right. But as a result of erosion, that infrastructure can be exposed. Conventionally, the repairs have been very piecemeal and temporary. But with a full-fledged stormwater program in place, we were able to work with our utilities to basically take more comprehensive approaches to addressing these infrastructure exposures. In this case, we did a stream and wetland project where we basically buried that utility infrastructure again. We're able to get credit for our MS4 permit. We're able to get some funding from the utility fund to help contribute to the overall project and to get a much better project in terms of infrastructure protection in the long run as a result. And we've had a number of those efforts that have materialized, again, as a result of having a mature stormwater program embedded alongside our other utility operations. I probably should have put this slide a little bit earlier in the presentation, but this is just demonstrating the nitrogen reductions at our water reclamation facilities as a result of those upgrades. You can see from, say, 2010, the TMDL implementation to 2020, basically cut in half the amount of nitrogen leaving those sites, despite the fact that the actual volumes of water and sewage coming into those systems have increased over that time frame. So the technology impacts there have been dramatic. And I'm a big advocate of the Bay Restoration Funding effort in Maryland in terms of incentivizing local jurisdictions to upgrade those wastewater treatment plants to the limits of technology. It's been very effective. Again, just a sort of conceptual model of that trading in time. So those nutrient credits generated through our wastewater treatment plants allowed us to have a little bit more time to actually accomplish the stormwater work. And within a couple of years of the extended permit time horizon, or the extension granted to us through the nutrient trade, we were able to supplant all of those wastewater credits with stormwater work in the ground, which I think is a win-win proposition. It wasn't an attempt to use the wastewater sector as a permanent solution to the stormwater sector, but it was an attempt to basically deal more realistically, essentially, with those very, very ambitious stormwater goals put in the MS4 permit. One of the things that I'll speak to specifically on the stormwater side in Maryland has been that I've been with the county now for about 8.5 years, and over that time frame, early or sort of before that time frame, there was a lot of discoordination between the local jurisdictions. There was a lot of inconsistent communication between local jurisdictions and the state regulating agency. different jurisdictions would ask the question and get different answers in terms of how to respond. And so there's been a lot more coordination between the large phase ones in particular in Maryland over that time frame, which has been very, very productive. I think not just for the local governments, but frankly for the state regulatory agency in terms of being able to deal with sort of a unified front there. We've had lots of discussions about restoration requirements. We've been able to give feedback to MDE about sort of the realistic difficulties with regards to the aggressive implementation requirements that were in the previous permit. We were initially thinking we were actually going to get another permit that was similarly situated. They ended up dampening down the requirements, I think, to a bit more realistic amount in our latest iteration, which was issued just last November. We've had lots of discussions about the restoration currency in the MS4 permits. One of the, again, for decades now in Maryland, impervious acres treated has been the currency. Many of us in the local government sector would like to see that just sort of more directly morphed to the TMDL constituents, as really impervious surface treatment is just a proxy really for those other constituents. And we feel like it would be easier to explain to the public and to politicians if it were translated to nutrients and sediment reduction. One of the things that I'll discuss a little bit on the next slide as well is looking at ways to be more efficient with funds within the MS4 permit. So our MS4 permits have requirements about monitoring water quality. We were able to work with MDE to create a fee in lieu option essentially for some of those monitoring requirements so that the dollars can be more efficiently spent and actually be more productive in terms of advancing the science on this front. One of the other things that I'll mention is that looking at some of the non-traditional TMDLs, things like PCBs, initially, there were sort of thought processes of, putting plans together and all these kinds of things. And for many of these non-traditional TMDLs, the monitoring work simply hasn't even been done to really get a handle on where are the sources of some of these pollutants. And so we've been able to work closely with MDE and actually local universities to try to really take a much more stepwise logical process to identifying and tracking down sources as opposed to sort of a shotgun approach to restoration of some of these other TMDLs. And then this conversation, which was brought up in one of the earlier New Jersey DEP presentations, is, how do we give local governments recognition for the fact that they're doing flood conveyance work on the stormwater side, that costs lots of money, but that's not usually traditionally captured in the MS4 permits. And so we just feel like it's important for that to be recognized as part of the local government contribution to these overall efforts as well. This is that pooled monitoring program that I had mentioned in terms of the fee in lieu option. It's really fascinating that in Maryland, this effort has been sort of gestating for maybe 7 or 8 years. And sort of independently, there is a similar program in the Pacific Northwest in the area around Seattle and Washington, where local MS4s can contribute essentially to a pool, and there are scientific questions that are thrown out and answered either by academics or consultants that help both the regulatory agencies and the local governments, but done in a much more sort of scientifically rigorous and repeatable and valuable way than a lot of the monitoring that has historically gone on at the local level, which many of the jurisdictions have felt wasn't particularly useful and wasn't money well spent. So that was really a breakthrough in this last permit cycle that we felt like was a real benefit for all the folks involved. I'm going to be in one of the breakout rooms. I'm happy to answer questions when we have the opportunity to do so. I hope that's been useful for folks who are on the webinar, and look forward to taking questions shortly. Thanks.
Eric, thank you so much. We do have time for questions. Eric's finished a couple minutes early, so if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat, raise your hand, unmute, ask a question. I'll kind of pause for about 30 seconds and allow people to ask a question if they have it. If not, we can get started with the breakout room early, but let me do that pause now. But just thank you so much, Eric, for coming and speaking. It was wonderful presentation, and we can already see some of the relationships that your own priorities have with New Jersey priorities. So if you have a question, you can feel free to post it in the chat or raise your hand and ask the question. Ellen Kohler, one of our facilitators to the breakout rooms, asked, could Eric share the previous MS4 reduction requirement versus the new one?
Sure. So in the previous MS4 requirement, there was essentially no numeric goal associated with the restoration that had to occur. And so many of the jurisdictions, including my own at that point, were doing it really on a piecemeal basis. It was tied often to dredging work or maybe to some other kinds of impacts, but there really was no independent funding source for it. So it was really catch can. And this latest, in the permit put in place in 2014, counties were required to retrofit 20% of the existing untreated impervious surface within the county within a 5-year time frame, which is, was incredibly aggressive. Like I say, 2 of the bigger jurisdictions, Prince George's County and Montgomery County, ended up having going into consent decrees as a result of not being able to achieve those goals in that time frame. And we would have as well if we didn't have that nutrient trading option. The current permit that went into place in November 2021 requires us to treat about 12% of the existing untreated impervious surface. So, and just to put that in context, that's about 3,000 acres of untreated impervious area over the course of the 5-year time frame of that permit.
Thank you. One of our oh, go ahead, Chris.
No. If you have another question, pose it.
It's a question for DEP. It's not for Eric. So if you have a question for Eric, we can ask that real quickly.
Well, I was just going to plant a seed for folks to be thinking about the breakout sessions and how some of the work that Arundel County has been doing, how can that apply to some of the communities in New Jersey? And also just a shout out to Eric. I grew up in Arundel County near Fort Meade, and and I love when I can go back, but I'm here in Syracuse now. So
great to hear.
The question that Naomi has for folks with DEP, probably Katie or Gabe, New Jersey state legislature passed a law in 2019 for stormwater authority formation. What has happened since then with that law?
Well, I suppose the answer is a lot. The law required the DEP to form stormwater utility guidance, which we did, and we released that guidance 2020, I want to say, 2021. I could put a link to that in the chat. I know that there are municipalities that have done feasibility studies and are working towards the formation of utilities, but of course, that law was passed right before the pandemic, so I think that put kind of or slowed down any municipal efforts towards forming stormwater utilities. But as far as I know, there is at least around a dozen municipalities that are seriously looking into forming stormwater utilities.
So, Evan, I'd like to speak to that, not to the New Jersey example, but just sort of to the Maryland analog, because Maryland passed a similar piece of legislation in sort of the mid-2000s, basically enabling legislation for local jurisdictions to be able to create stormwater authorities. At that point, or within a couple of years of that, one jurisdiction did, Montgomery County, Maryland, which is the biggest jurisdiction in Maryland. And it took another 6 or 7 years, and this actually speaks to my previous work on the advocacy side. Basically, the advocacy community came together over the course of a couple of years in the Maryland legislature and eventually got a piece of legislation passed that required phase 1 MS4s to put in place stormwater utilities, because without the regulatory driver or the threat of regulatory noncompliance or consequences for regulatory noncompliance, what happened was the jurisdictions weren't stepping up. I mean, there are lots of great, I'm sure, white papers and other kinds of technical documents on how this is done and what the benefits are. But when the rubber meets the road, getting a new dedicated funding source put in place is a very difficult political challenge. And so I would say, don't underestimate the degree to which permits with teeth in them, MS4 permits with teeth in them, can be an important driver of the ultimate adoption of these funding sources.
Thank you so much. Brianne Callahan from New Jersey Future kind of posted in the chat that they have a wonderful resource for stormwater utilities in New Jersey. And Jen Cotting has posted that link in the chat. And Naomi followed up on her question to say that New Jersey does have a strong township structure. And Eric, you noted that in your speech a little bit earlier, how Maryland's a little bit more county focused, and New Jersey and Pennsylvania tend to be more township focused. And she asked, utilities often span multiple townships. So how can utilities cooperate with each other to create one water approaches when our work is so siloed? And I'll just say that we're going to talk about that in the breakout chat. And we're going to work through that together on the difficulties that having utilities spanning multiple townships may incur, and when one utility might be owned by the township and the other utility is owned by the county, or it's a regional utility. So we'll get into that a bit in the breakout room. So those are excellent points, Naomi, and thank you, Brianne, for sharing the resource, and thank you, Eric, for your answer there. We kind of gave each facilitator has the task of summarizing one of the questions. So breakout group 1 is Ellen's breakout group. So do you want to just quickly go over, and I don't think we need to spend as much time on this one as some of the other ones, just go over some of the highlights about what they took out of the Anne Arundel case study and how it can translate to New Jersey.
Yeah, sure. I mean, some of the things that came out for folks were thinking about funding, and that funding is going to be a big issue in terms of moving forward with stormwater management for communities in New Jersey. Also thinking about the increase, what some communities are seeing in New Jersey in terms of increasing amounts of impervious cover, particularly from warehouse projects. And that's going to create some ongoing and larger challenges than what they're currently experiencing, which is even more daunting to think about, I suppose. That we've got deteriorating infrastructure, and that's a big challenge that we have as well in terms of how we are managing a project, having deteriorating infrastructure during a project. That's a big plus. So addressing that, so sort of taking a dig once approach, like if we're going to fix something, let's fix the deteriorating or aging infrastructure as well. Found it really interesting that the idea of having a temporary sort of trade for work that was done at the wastewater treatment plant in terms of the stormwater work. So like not a permanent trade, but just a trade for to buy some time, basically. Thought that was really interesting. And then the last thing, that there are many municipalities that have standardized buffers that are associated with their zoning maps, and that meeting that minimum 50%. Ooh, I'm not getting that whole comment in there, but so that there are some things that probably are similar kinds of BMPs that could be used in New Jersey, as what we heard about in Maryland as well.
Okay, we're gonna do a little swap. So we're gonna have Heather cover the second question. Heather, you're muted. Sorry.
No problem.
Perfect.
So the question, what are the water resources challenges? So not surprisingly, there were many, and that probably took up one of the biggest components that we discussed. But one of the main was funding, and how do you get funding for the different projects that you want to have to accomplish your goals, getting the right points of contact within your community or in the adjacent communities that have overlapping resources that you need to share. One of them was how to keep politicians out of essential basic need decisions. That there was a lot of discussion about that, and then also community involvement and and how do you get the community on board with the goals that you want to accomplish, and how do you make sure that they buy in to what you're trying to do, because, you know, as Eric said, they're not really excited about nutrient reduction. That's not something that they get excited about. But if you can accomplish a goal that will have inherent value to that community, then that's where you can really get some goodwill, and people be more involved with that.
Thank you, Heather. We're going to do another swap. So I think I was sneaking a look at the slides, and it looked like Robin's group didn't have a great amount of time to cover the last question. So Robin, I'm going to move you to the fourth question, but we're going to cover Chris with the third question, and then Jen's going to do the fifth. So Chris, let's go next with the third question. So talking a little bit about what are other community goals that communities might want to address from a One Water mindset?
Yeah, so one of the opportunities, I think, you know, goals and opportunities, I think we discussed. So one of the opportunities is that there's more, I hate to use the word again, more opportunity for co-funding, right? So if we're doing green infrastructure in an urban area, you know, there could be wastewater money that could be applied. There could be transportation money that is applied based on the type of project. So more co-funding opportunities. Also looking at opportunity for and need for environmental education. So, you know, we're doing green infrastructure. We should be letting people know about it and what it is and why we took out this curb and put in this weird funky garden and what that garden is doing for our community. On that same vein, in order to get people to pay for those types of projects, they need to understand what they are. So it's kind of a hand-in-hand approach. Resiliency was also a community goal. It's not just physical resiliency, but also the social and economic resiliency. We can't continue to pay for efforts that we've done in the past that aren't going to work in the future. It's more expensive for communities that have less money to provide to stay resilient moving into a changing environment. And then protection of stream corridors, right? So if we're keeping water in MS4 communities out of naturalized stream systems, we're protecting those habitats, we're protecting those areas from erosion and other things. So those are our brief comments for question 3.
Thank you. Robin, could your group cover question 4? Do you have overlapping priorities to meet both climate resiliency and managing water resource goals?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So our group, we talked a lot about a key challenge is flooding. Was something that people were experiencing, and as well as water quality issues. So I think, that would definitely be an overlapping priority between climate resiliency goals and managing water resources effectively, is dealing with the flooding and dealing with emergencies. There was a conversation about how upstream projects could be affecting downstream municipalities, and that there's this lack of regional coordination across townships, that is very township to townships centric when emergencies happen or when planning is happening. So being able to approach flooding issues from a regional standpoint instead of trying to tackle it from a sole municipality was definitely something that could overlap and be a co-benefit, as well as education, being better at educating the municipal governing bodies or boards about the importance of addressing local and regional climate issues is another thing. And then obviously there's scarce resources, there's a limited amount of people who are trained, and so you could obviously have gain efficiencies by utilizing other resources, time and people.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the last one. So given the participants' role, what is the next step they could take? So I'm going to give that question to Jen.
Sure. Thanks, Evan. So from, we had a mix of folks in the room. From the municipal standpoint, I think funding was, again, it seems to have come up in every one of the questions, but funding for plan implementation is really important because I think communities are hesitant to go down the road of developing this kind of plan if they don't see implementation dollars available for actually rolling the plan out. Hesitancy to use up your political capital to put the plan in place if there's not a guarantee that you can implement. So that was certainly top priority from the municipal standpoint, thinking about ways on the funding, also on the funding side, thinking about ways to potentially tap into ARPA and infrastructure bill dollars for implementation. And then from the DEP NGO side of things, continuing to promote integrated and one water approaches and the benefits to communities of taking these approaches, developing outreach materials, distributing outreach materials and the like, that's a good role for the NGO community and DEP in terms of next steps. And then I added a comment for the EFCs to say, that since we're talking about, stormwater in particular and the footprint of some of the drinking water and wastewater utilities don't necessarily follow jurisdictional boundaries, it can be hard to start those conversations even if a community is really interested. Because it's hard to get out of our silos. I think someone put that in the chat earlier and I couldn't agree more. So the EFCs with a little bit of technical assistance dollars that we have available for the next month or two, we can serve as a convener of those conversations if that would be helpful for municipalities or utilities that are interested in moving forward.